The gunshot echoed across the dusty plains of Wyoming Territory. 1876, sending Elizabeth Davenport's heart racing as she urged her chestnut mare faster over the rugged terrain. Blood trickled down her arm where the bullet had grazed her, but she couldn't stop, not with the Blackburn gang closing in behind her. They wanted revenge for her testimony that had sent their leader to the gallows, and they wouldn't rest until she paid with her life. Brianna Dawson clutched the reins tighter as her horse's hooves pounded against the hard, packed earth. The setting sun cast long shadows across the prairie, and she knew she had to find shelter before nightfall. 3 days she'd been running, 3 days since Marshall Thompson had been gunned down trying to protect her. His final words still rang in her ears. "Ride for Alta, Wyoming. Find Sheriff Miller. He'll keep you safe." Alta was still miles away, and Brianna's strength was failing. The wound on her arm burned like fire, and her vision blurred with exhaustion. Behind her, the thundering hoofbeats grew louder. 5 men, maybe 6, led by the vengeful Jeremiah Blackburn, brother of the man she'd helped hang. "There she is," a gruff voice shouted. Another shot cracked through the air, spooking Brianna's horse. She fought to maintain control as the mare reared, nearly throwing her from the saddle. Panic surged through her veins as she scanned the horizon, desperate for any sign of salvation. That's when she saw a small homestead nestled against the foothills. Smoke rose lazily from the chimney, promising warmth and perhaps safety. With one last surge of energy, Brianna directed her mare toward the cabin, praying whoever lived there would take pity on a woman in peril. As she approached, the door to the cabin swung open, and a tall, broad-shouldered man stepped out, rifle in hand. His face was partially shadowed by his wide-brimmed hat, but Brianna could see the hard set of his jaw and the alertness in his stance. "Please," she gasped, pulling her horse to a stop. "They're coming. They'll kill me." The man's eyes narrowed as he gazed past her to the dust cloud rising in the distance. Without a word, he stepped forward and helped her down from the saddle. "Get inside," he commanded, his voice deep and steady. "You don't understand," Brianna protested, swaying on her feet. "These men are killers. I can't bring this trouble to your door." The stranger's expression didn't change as he guided her firmly toward the cabin. Only when she was safely inside did he turn to face the approaching riders, his rifle held confidently across his chest. "Owen," a woman's voice called from within the cabin. "What's happening?" "Stay inside, Ma," he answered without turning. "We've got company." The riders pulled to a stop 30 yards from the cabin, dust settling around their mounts. Brianna watched through the window as the leader, Jeremiah Blackburn, spat on the ground and adjusted his gun belt. "That woman's our business, mister," Blackburn called out. "Hand her over and we'll be on our way. No need for things to get messy." The man called Owen stood his ground, his posture relaxed yet ready. "The lady's under my protection now. You've got no business here." Blackburn laughed, a cold, harsh sound that sent shivers down Brianna's spine. "Do you know who I am? That woman testified against my brother, got him hanged last month in Cheyenne. Now she's going to pay." Owen didn't flinch. "I don't care who you are or what grievance you think you have. This is my land and that woman is my guest. If you want her, you'll face me first." The words hung in the air like the promise of thunder before a storm. Brianna pressed a hand to her mouth to stifle a gasp. This stranger was willing to risk his life for her, a woman he'd just met. Blackburn and his men exchanged glances, clearly weighing their options. 5 against 1 seemed like favorable odds, but something about Owen's demeanor gave them pause. "This ain't over," Blackburn finally snarled. "We'll be back, and next time we won't be asking nicely." With that, he jerked his horse around and galloped away, his men following close behind. Only when they were specks on the horizon did Owen lower his rifle and turn back to the cabin. Brianna met him at the door, her legs still unsteady. Now that the immediate danger had passed, she could take in the details of her savior. He was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30, with sun-bronzed skin and keen hazel eyes. A thin scar ran along his jawline, and his hands, though calloused from hard work, moved with a surprising gentleness as he helped her to a chair. "You're bleeding," he observed, nodding at her arm. "It's just a graze," Brianna replied, though the wound throbbed painfully. An older woman emerged from the back room, her silver-streaked hair pulled into a neat bun. She took one look at Brianna and hurried to fetch a basin of water. "I'm Martha Rhodes," she said, returning with clean cloths and a bottle of whiskey. "That stubborn man is my son, Owen." "Brianna Dawson," she introduced herself, wincing as Martha began cleaning the wound. "I can't thank you enough for your help." Owen had moved to the window, keeping watch. "Those men, they'll be back," he said, his voice matter of fact. "Blackburn's not one to let things go." "I know," Brianna said quietly. "I was headed to Alta to find Sheriff Miller. The marshal in Laramie said he could protect me until the territory marshal arrives." Owen nodded. "Alta's a half-day's ride from here, but you're in no condition to travel tonight." He turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "You can rest here. Tomorrow I'll take you into town." "I've already put you in danger," Brianna protested. "I can't ask for more." "You didn't ask," Owen replied simply. "I offered." Martha finished bandaging Brianna's arm and stood gathering her supplies. "You'll stay for supper in the night. That's settled. Owen, fetch the lady's bags from her horse and see to the animal." As Owen stepped outside, Martha gave Brianna a gentle smile. "Don't mind my son. He's not much for words, but he's a good man. Lost his father to outlaws 5 years back might be why he was so quick to stand up for you." Brianna nodded, feeling a pang of sympathy. "I lost my father, too, to consumption last year. He was a judge in Denver. After he died, I moved to Laramie to work as a schoolteacher." She hesitated, then added, "I never meant to get involved with the Blackburns, but I witnessed Thomas Blackburn shoot a man in cold blood over a card game. When the marshal asked for witnesses, I couldn't stay silent." Martha patted her hand. "You did the right thing, child. Evil flourishes when good people say nothing." Later that evening, after a simple but hearty meal, Brianna sat by the fire, wrapped in a quilt Martha had provided. Her body ached with exhaustion, but her mind refused to quiet. Owen entered from outside, where he'd been checking on the horses. He hung his hat on a peg by the door and poured himself a cup of coffee before sitting in the chair opposite her. "You should get some rest," he said, noticing her drawn expression. "Every time I close my eyes, I see them coming for me," Brianna admitted. "In Laramie, they killed the marshal right in front of me. He was a good man with a family." Owen's jaw tightened. "The Blackburns have been terrorizing this territory for years. Thomas was the worst of the lot, but Jeremiah's not far behind. You know them, know of them," Owen clarified. "Every honest man in these parts does. They've robbed stage coaches, rustled cattle, murdered anyone who stood in their way." He took a sip of coffee, studying her over the rim of his cup. "It took courage to testify against them." Brianna looked down at her hands. "I don't feel courageous. I feel frightened and foolish." "Courage isn't about not being afraid," Owen said quietly. "It's about doing what's right despite the fear." Their eyes met across the firelight, and Brianna felt something shift inside her. For the first time in days, she didn't feel completely alone. Morning came with the crow of a rooster and the soft glow of dawn filtering through the cabin windows. Brianna woke feeling surprisingly refreshed, her arm still sore but less painful than the day before. Martha had already prepared breakfast cornbread, eggs, and strong coffee that helped chase away the last vestiges of sleep. Owen entered from outside, his clothes damp from morning chores. "Saddle up after breakfast," he told Brianna. "We should reach Alta by midday if we keep a good pace." "I can't thank you enough for all this," Brianna said, gesturing to include the food, shelter, and promise of protection. Owen merely nodded, accepting her gratitude without comment. He was a man of few words. Brianna was learning, but his actions spoke volumes. An hour later they were mounted and ready to depart. Martha hugged Brianna warmly, pressing a small bundle of food into her hands. "For the journey," she explained. "And remember, you're welcome here anytime." Owen led the way, setting a steady pace that Brianna's mare could maintain without tiring too quickly. They rode in companionable silence for the first hour, the rolling prairie stretching out around them, dotted with sagebrush, and the occasional stand of cottonwoods near hidden creeks. "Have you lived in these parts all your life?" Brianna finally asked, curious about the quiet man beside her. Owen adjusted his hat against the rising sun. "Born in Missouri. Pa brought us west when I was 12, chasing rumors of good land and better opportunities. Been here ever since." "Do you like it, the ranching life?" A small smile touched his lips. "Most days, it's honest work and there's a certain freedom to it." He glanced at her. "What about you? Always been a school teacher?" Brianna shook her head. "I wanted to be a writer when I was younger. Filled notebooks with stories that horrified my mother." She smiled at the memory. "But Papa encouraged me. He said education was the future of the West, so I went to Teachers College in Denver." "You like teaching?" "I do. Children have such curious minds, such capacity for wonder." Her smile faded. "I wonder if I'll ever teach again after all this." Owen studied her profile. "The law will catch up to the Blackburns eventually. Men like that always overreach." "I hope you're right," Brianna sighed, "but they have friends everywhere." "Even in Laramie, where Thomas was hanged, people whispered against me, said I should have kept my head down, minded my own business." "Would have been easier," Owen acknowledged, "but not right." They crested a small rise and Owen suddenly raised his hand, signaling for Brianna to stop. He scanned the horizon, his posture alert. "What is it?" Brianna asked, her heart beginning to race. "Dust cloud, 3 o'clock. Could be nothing," but he reached for his rifle, securing it in its scabbard for easy access. "The Blackburns," Brianna whispered, fear tightening her throat. "Can't tell yet, but we're not taking chances." Owen pointed to a ravine about half a mile to their left. "We'll head that way, use the terrain for cover." They urged their horses forward, moving as quickly as they dared across the open ground. Brianna kept glancing over her shoulder, the dust cloud growing larger by the minute. "Riders," Owen confirmed grimly as they reached the edge of the ravine. "At least 4 of them, moving fast." Brianna's hands trembled on the reins. "They've found us." "Down here," Owen directed, guiding his horse carefully down the slope into the ravine. "Stay low and follow the dry creek bed. It winds toward Alta." They picked their way along the bottom of the ravine, the walls rising 15 feet on either side. It offered protection from sight, but also left them with limited escape routes if they were discovered. The sound of hoofbeats grew louder, then stopped abruptly. Voices drifted down from above, too distant to make out words but close enough to identify the harsh tones of men searching for prey. Owen dismounted in one fluid motion, signaling for Brianna to do the same. He helped her down, then led both horses deeper into the shadows of an overhanging ledge. "Stay here," he whispered, drawing his rifle. "If anything happens to me, follow this ravine for another mile. It opens up near Elk Creek. Cross the creek and head east. You'll reach the Alta Road." "I'm not leaving you," Brianna protested, clutching his arm. Owen's eyes softened momentarily. You're a brave woman, Brianna Dawson, but right now staying alive is what matters. Before she could respond, a voice called from above. I know you're down there, Rhodes. Saw you duck into this gulch. Owen pushed Brianna further into the shadows, then positioned himself behind a large boulder, rifle at the ready. Blackburn, he called back. You're a long way from Laramie. Jeremiah's laugh echoed off the ravine walls. Made some inquiries after our little chat yesterday. Turns out you've got quite a reputation. Former cavalry scout, decorated for bravery during the Sioux campaigns. Now just a dirt farmer playing hero. If you know all that, Owen replied calmly, then you know I'm not an easy man to kill. Maybe not, Blackburn conceded. But 5 against 1. Those odds favor me, Rhodes. Owen glanced at Brianna, who had pressed herself against the ravine wall, her face pale but determined. What do you want, Blackburn? He called, playing for time. The woman, simple as that, hand her over and you can go home to your mother. And if I refuse, then we burn your ranch to the ground after we're done with you. Your choice. Owen's jaw tightened. For a moment, Brianna feared he might actually consider Blackburn's offer. It would be the sensible thing to do after all. Why die for a stranger? But Owen's next words dispelled her doubts. You'll have to come down here and get her, Blackburn. And I promise, at least 3 of you won't be climbing back out. Silence fell, broken only by the soft nickering of horses above. Then the sound of sliding rocks as someone began to descend into the ravine. Owen sighted down his rifle, tracking the movement. He squeezed the trigger and the shot echoed deafeningly in the confined space, a cry of pain followed by cursing. That's one, Owen called out. Who's next? Gunfire erupted from above, bullets pinging off rocks and sending fragments flying. Owen ducked lower, motioning for Brianna to do the same. They can't hit what they can't see, he reassured her, his voice surprisingly steady. But we can't stay here forever. What do we do? Brianna asked, trying to match his calm. Owen surveyed their surroundings, his mind clearly working through their limited options. The ravine narrows about 100 yards ahead. If we can reach that point, they'll have a harder time targeting us from above. More gunfire rained down, closer this time. One of the horses whinnied in fear, pulling at its reins. Now, Owen decided. Stay low and move fast. They crept forward, leading the increasingly nervous horses. Brianna's heart hammered in her chest as bullets continued to strike around them, seemingly random but getting more accurate as the outlaws adjusted their aim. Suddenly, Owen stumbled, grabbing his side. Brianna rushed to him, horrified to see blood seeping between his fingers. It's nothing, he grunted, straightening. Keep moving. But Brianna could see the pain in his eyes, the growing stain on his shirt. You're hit. Just a graze, Owen insisted, though it was clearly more serious. We need to keep. His words were cut off by a triumphant shout from above. Got him, the bastard's hit. Owen, Brianna whispered urgently. You can't fight them all not wounded. Let me surrender, maybe they'll let you go. The look he gave her was equal parts disbelief and determination. That's not happening. I won't have your death on my conscience too. Owen's expression softened. My choice, Brianna, not yours. He checked his rifle, wincing with the movement. Besides, we've got one advantage they don't know about. What's that? He reached into his saddlebag and withdrew a small metal object. It took Brianna a moment to recognize it as a mirror. Army trick, Owen explained. Let's see where they are positioned. Carefully, he extended the mirror above a rock, angling it to catch glimpses of the ravine rim. 4 of them left, spread out along both sides. He tucked the mirror away and reloaded his rifle. We're about 30 yards from the narrow section. Once there, I can hold them off while you continue on. I told you I won't leave you, Brianna said firmly. Owen studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. Then we moved together. On my signal, run for that bend in the ravine, I'll cover you." Brianna gathered her skirts, prepared to sprint. Owen took a deep breath, then stood and fired 3 rapid shots at the ravine's edge. The outlaws ducked for cover, giving them their chance. "Now," Owen shouted. Brianna ran, heart pounding, expecting at any moment to feel the bite of a bullet. Behind her, Owen fired again, then followed, his stride hampered by his injury but still powerful. They reached the narrow section just as the outlaws recovered, bullets kicking up dust at their heels. Here, the ravine walls rose nearly vertical, creating a natural bottleneck. Owen positioned himself at the entrance to this section, rifle ready. "They'll have to come straight at us now," he said grimly. "No more shooting from above." As if in answer to his assessment, Blackburn's voice echoed down the ravine. "You're trapped, Rhodes. Nowhere to go but through us." Owen didn't bother responding. Instead, he checked his ammunition and reloaded his pistol, handing it to Brianna. "Just in case," he said. She took it, the weight unfamiliar but oddly reassuring in her hand. "I've never fired a gun before," she admitted. "Point and squeeze the trigger," Owen instructed. "But let's hope it doesn't come to that." The standoff stretched for minutes that felt like hours. The sun climbed higher, beating down into the ravine, turning it into an oven. Brianna offered Owen water from her canteen, concerned by the pallor beneath his tan and the sweat beading on his forehead. "How bad is it?" she asked, nodding toward his wound. Owen lifted his shirt slightly, revealing a deep furrow across his ribs, still oozing blood. "Had worse," he said, though his tight expression belied the casual words. "It needs cleaning, bandaging." "Later," Owen promised, "when we're safe." A cascade of small rocks announced movement at the wider end of the ravine. Owen raised his rifle but didn't fire. "They're trying to flush us out," he explained. "Make us waste ammunition shooting at shadows." "How long can we stay here?" Brianna asked, wiping sweat from her brow. Owen grimaced. "Not indefinitely. Eventually, they'll realize they can wait us out. We need a plan." As they considered their options, a new sound reached them, the distant but unmistakable rhythm of multiple horses approaching from the direction of Alta. Owen's expression sharpened. Riders coming. Could be help, could be more of Blackburn's men. The outlaws had heard it too. Urgent voices conferred above, followed by Blackburn's distinctive growl. "This ain't over, Rhodes. Tell that woman she's living on borrowed time." The sounds of retreating hoofbeats confirmed the outlaws' departure, at least for now. Owen sagged against the ravine wall, the adrenaline that had kept him going beginning to fade. "We need to move," he said, his voice weaker than before. "Could be a patrol from Alta, or could be trouble." Brianna helped him to his feet, alarmed by how heavily he leaned on her. They mounted their horses with difficulty, Owen swaying slightly in the saddle. They had just emerged from the narrow section of the ravine when 6 riders appeared at its mouth. Brianna tensed, raising the pistol Owen had given her until she saw the glint of a badge on the lead rider's chest. "Sheriff Miller," Owen called, recognition and relief in his voice. "Your timing is impeccable." The sheriff, a weathered man with iron-gray hair and a neatly trimmed mustache, surveyed the scene with experienced eyes. "Rhodes," he acknowledged, "seems you've had some trouble." His gaze shifted to Brianna, then to Owen's blood-stained shirt. "And you must be Miss Dawson." "Marshal Thompson's telegram reached me 3 days ago. Been sending patrols out looking for you." "The Blackburns found her first," Owen explained, his words becoming less distinct as his strength ebbed. 5 of them. They're headed northwest now." Miller gestured to 2 of his deputies. "Gibson, Taylor, track them. The rest of you help Mr. Rhodes. We need to get him to Doc Spencer's, quick." As the deputies moved to assist, Owen's eyes met Brianna's one last time before he slumped forward, unconscious. Panic surged through her as they lifted him from his horse and laid him gently on the ground. "He's lost a lot of blood," one deputy observed, pressing a cloth to the wound. "Will he be all right?" Brianna asked, her voice breaking. Sheriff Miller's expression was grim but not without hope. "Owen Rhodes is one of the toughest men I know. If anyone can pull through, he can. But we need to get moving." They fashioned a travois using branches and blankets, securing Owen to it as comfortably as possible. The journey to Alta seemed endless to Brianna, who rode beside the travois, watching Owen's pale face for any sign of waking. Alta appeared on the horizon like a mirage, a small but thriving town nestled at the base of rolling foothills. Unlike some of the rougher mining settlements Brianna had seen, Alta had the look of permanence. Sturdy wooden buildings, a proper church with a steeple, even a schoolhouse at the edge of town. People emerged from shops and houses as they approached, word of their arrival spreading quickly. By the time they reached the doctor's office, a small crowd had gathered. Dr. Spencer, a surprisingly young man with spectacles and a thoughtful demeanor, took charge immediately. "Get him inside," he directed the deputies. "Miss, you're injured as well." Brianna glanced at her bandaged arm, nearly forgotten in her concern for Owen. "It's nothing serious. Please help him first." The doctor nodded and disappeared into his surgery with Owen and two assistants, leaving Brianna standing uncertainly in the waiting room. Sheriff Miller guided her gently to a chair. "There's nothing you can do for him right now except rest and recover yourself," he said kindly. "I've arranged a room for you at the boarding house. Mrs. Peterson runs a respectable establishment. My deputy's wife left some clothes that should fit you well enough until you can get your own." Brianna nodded numbly, exhaustion finally catching up to her. "The Blackburns, we'll find them," Miller assured her. "In the meantime, you'll be safe here. Alta takes care of its own, and anyone under Owen Rhodes's protection qualifies." "You know him well." The sheriff's weathered face softened. "Known Owen since he was knee-high to a grasshopper. His father, Jacob, was my deputy before." He trailed off, then continued, "Owen's a good man. Keeps to himself mostly, runs his ranch, helps his neighbors, but I've never known him to back down from a fight when it mattered." Brianna thought of Owen standing alone against 5 armed outlaws, all to protect a woman he'd just met. "No," she agreed softly. "I don't believe he would." Hours later, clean, fed, and settled in a comfortable room at the boarding house, Brianna sat by the window watching the main street of Alta. Mrs. Peterson, a kindly widow with a no-nonsense attitude, had fussed over her like a mother hen, insisting on proper bandaging for her arm and providing a simple but pretty blue dress to replace Brianna's travel-stained clothing. A knock at the door roused her from her thoughts. She opened it to find Sheriff Miller, his expression grave but not despairing. "How is he?" Brianna asked immediately. "Holding his own," Miller replied. "Doc Spencer removed the bullet and stitched him up. Says if infection doesn't set in, Owen's got a good chance. He's tough as old leather, that one." Relief flooded through her. "Can I see him?" Miller hesitated. "He's still unconscious. Probably will be till morning at least, but I suppose a short visit wouldn't hurt." He offered his arm. "I'll escort you. We need to talk anyway about the Blackburns and what happens next." The doctor's office was quiet when they arrived, the evening patients gone home. Dr. Spencer looked up from his desk, surprised to see them. "Sheriff, Miss Dawson, I wasn't expecting visitors at this hour. How's our patient?" Miller asked. "Stable," Spencer reported. "The bullet cracked a rib but missed anything vital. Blood loss was my main concern, but he's young and strong. With proper care and rest, he should recover fully." "May I see him?" Brianna asked again. The doctor studied her face, then nodded. 5 minutes only. He needs his rest. He led her to a small, clean room at the back of the building. Owen lay on a narrow bed, his chest wrapped in white bandages, his face unnaturally still in sleep. Brianna approached quietly, shocked by how vulnerable he looked compared to the strong, confident man who had faced down outlaws to protect her. On impulse, she reached out and took his hand. It was warm, the calloused palm rough against her fingers. "Thank you," she whispered, "for everything." Whether it was her imagination or not, she thought she felt his fingers tighten slightly around hers. Dr. Spencer cleared his throat gently from the doorway. "I'm afraid I must insist on that 5-minute limit, Miss Dawson. You can return in the morning." Reluctantly, she released Owen's hand and followed the doctor back to where Sheriff Miller waited. "Now," the sheriff said once they were seated in the doctor's office, "I need to know everything about your encounter with the Blackburns from the beginning." Brianna took a deep breath and told her story, witnessing Thomas Blackburn's crime, testifying at his trial, the threats that followed, and finally, Marshall Thompson's death and her flight toward Alta. Miller listened without interruption, occasionally making notes. "You've been through quite an ordeal," he said when she finished. "But you're safe now. My deputies are patrolling the town borders, and I've sent telegrams to every settlement within 50 miles to be on the lookout for Jeremiah Blackburn and his gang." "What happens now?" Brianna asked. "The territorial marshal is due here in 3 days. Once he arrives, you'll be under federal protection. In the meantime, you'll stay at the boarding house. I've assigned Deputy Wilson to guard you. He'll be outside your door tonight." Brianna nodded, grateful for the security but uncomfortable with the special treatment. "And after the marshal comes," Miller's expression turned sympathetic. "That depends on whether they capture the Blackburns. You might need to testify again." He hesitated, then added, "You might also need to consider whether returning to Laramie is wise, at least for a while." The reality of her situation struck Brianna anew. Her life had been irrevocably altered by one moment of moral courage. "I have nowhere else to go," she admitted. "Teaching is all I know." "Alta could use a teacher," Miller said, surprising her. "Our last one left 2 months ago to get married. The children are being taught by the preacher's wife for now, but she's expecting and can't continue much longer." Hope flickered in Brianna's heart. "You think the town would consider hiring me?" "I don't see why not," Miller replied. "You're qualified, and once this business with the Blackburns is settled, you'll be free to start a new life." A new life. The phrase echoed in Brianna's mind as she returned to the boarding house. Deputy Wilson, a respectful shadow behind her. She had come to Wyoming territory seeking exactly that after her father's death, never imagining the path it would take. And now there was Owen, a man she barely knew but who had risked everything for her. She found herself thinking of his quiet strength, his unwavering principles, the rare smile that transformed his serious face. What place might he have in this new life she was contemplating? Morning brought sunshine streaming through the lace curtains of Brianna's room and the tantalizing aroma of fresh bread from Mrs. Peterson's kitchen. She dressed quickly in the borrowed clothes, eager to return to the doctor's office. Deputy Wilson escorted her through town, vigilant but friendly as he pointed out landmarks: the general store, the telegraph office, the small bank that opened just last year. Alta was growing, he explained, thanks to the cattle industry and its position on the stage route to Cheyenne. At the doctor's office they found Owen awake, propped up against pillows and looking pale but alert. His face brightened visibly when Brianna entered the room. "Good morning," she said, suddenly shy in a way she hadn't expected. "How are you feeling?" "Like I got kicked by a mule," Owen admitted, his voice rougher than usual. "But Doc Spencer says I'll live." "Thanks to your hard head," the the doctor added as he checked Owen's bandages. Most men would have the sense to duck when bullets are flying. Owen's eyes never left Brianna's face. Some things are worth taking risks for. The doctor raised an eyebrow but said nothing as he finished his examination. The wound looks clean, no sign of infection. Another day of rest here, then you can move to the hotel if you promise to take it easy. After he left, an awkward silence fell between them. Brianna took the chair beside Owen's bed, trying to organize her tumultuous thoughts. Sheriff Miller says the territorial marshal will be here in 3 days, she finally said. They're still searching for the Blackburns. Owen nodded. Miller stopped by earlier, told me they found tracks heading toward the Montana border. Jeremiah knows every hideout in 3 territories. He won't be easy to catch. I've put everyone in danger, Brianna said softly. You, your mother, this town. You did what was right, Owen countered firmly. The danger comes from men like Blackburn who think they can operate outside the law. Brianna studied her hands, gathering courage. Sheriff Miller mentioned that Alta needs a teacher. He suggested I might apply for the position after everything is resolved. She glanced up to gauge Owen's reaction, finding him watching her with an intensity that made her heart skip. Would you want that? He asked. To stay in Alta? I think I might, she admitted. I've lost my home in Laramie in a way, and Alta seems like a good place. A place where people stand up for what's right. Owen's lips curved in that rare smile. It is that. He shifted slightly, wincing at the movement. My ranch is only 5 miles outside town. Ma would be glad to have a neighbor who appreciates her apple pie. The implication hung in the air between them, neither quite ready to acknowledge it directly. I should let you rest, Brianna said, rising, but I'll come back later if that's all right. Owen caught her hand before she could turn away. I'd like that, he said simply. The next 2 days fell into a pattern. Brianna spent her mornings exploring Alta under Deputy Wilson's watchful eye, her afternoons visiting Owen, whose strength returned remarkably quickly, and her evenings at the boarding house, where Mrs. Peterson and the other residents welcomed her warmly into their community. On the 3rd day, Owen was deemed well enough to leave the doctor's care. Brianna met him outside the office, where he stood testing his balance, still moving gingerly but clearly determined to regain his independence. Should you be up so soon? She asked, concerned by the lines of pain around his eyes despite his obvious improvement. Owen adjusted his hat, which Sheriff Miller had retrieved from the ravine along with his other belongings. Doc Spencer says walking will do me good, as long as I don't overdo it. And where exactly are you walking to? Thought I might show you around town properly, he suggested. If you're considering staying, you should know what you're getting into. Despite her worries about his condition, Brianna couldn't suppress a smile. I'd like that. They strolled slowly down Alta's main street. Owen pointing out details. A casual observer might miss the blacksmith who made the best horseshoes in 3 counties, the assay office where miners brought their findings, the saloon that, unlike most, enforced strict rules against excessive drunkenness or gunplay. Alta's different from other frontier towns, Owen explained as they paused outside the schoolhouse, a sturdy building with large windows and a small bell tower. The founders had a vision for a permanent settlement, not just a boom-and-bust mining camp. They brought their families, built for the future. Brianna peered through the schoolhouse window, imagining herself at the teacher's desk, helping shape that future. It's lovely, she said sincerely. Would you like to see inside? Owen offered. Miller gave me the key. The interior was simple but well-maintained, rows of desks facing a larger teacher's desk, a blackboard covering one wall, bookshelves along another. A globe stood in one corner, and maps of the United States and Wyoming Territory hung from wooden rails. Brianna ran her fingers along the smooth surface of the teacher's desk. "How many students attend?" 28 at last count, Owen replied, watching her reaction. "Ages 6 to 16. Ranchers' children, shopkeepers' children, a few from the mining families up in the hills. Good kids, mostly." "You know them well." Owen leaned against a desk, managing not to wince at the movement. "I help with the Christmas pageant every year. Ma insists." A fond smile softened his features. "Last year I played the innkeeper, had exactly one line which I nearly forgot." The image of this serious, capable man nervously delivering a line in a children's pageant made Brianna laugh. The sound echoed in the empty classroom, bright and unexpected. "I think you'd be good for this place," Owen said suddenly. "And it might be good for you too." Before Brianna could respond, Deputy Wilson appeared in the doorway, slightly out of breath. "Miss Dawson, Mr. Rhodes, the marshal's arrived. Sheriff Miller wants you both at his office right away." Marshal Daniel Hayes was a formidable figure, tall and broad-shouldered, with sharp blue eyes that seemed to miss nothing. He listened to Brianna's account with focused attention, occasionally asking for clarification, but otherwise allowing her to tell her story without interruption. When she finished, he nodded thoughtfully. "You've shown remarkable courage, Miss Dawson. Not many would have testified against Thomas Blackburn in the first place, let alone persisted after the threats began." "I didn't feel I had a choice," Brianna replied. "I saw what he did. That poor man had a family. Principles often come at a price," Hayes observed, his gaze shifting to Owen. "Sheriff Miller tells me you took on 5 of Blackburn's men to protect Miss Dawson." Owen shrugged, then tried to hide the pain the movement caused. "Seemed like the right thing to do." Hayes's mouth twitched. "Indeed." He turned back to Brianna. "I have news that may interest you. Thomas Blackburn's associate, a man named Curtis Larson, was captured near Fort Laramie 2 days ago. In exchange for leniency, he's provided information about the gang's operations, including their likely hideouts." Hope surged through Brianna. "Does that mean you'll be able to find Jeremiah?" "We have posses searching 3 territories," Hayes confirmed. "It's only a matter of time now. But until we have them in custody, you remain in danger." "What do you suggest?" Sheriff Miller asked. "Miss Dawson will need to stay somewhere secure, somewhere the Blackburns wouldn't expect." Hayes considered for a moment. "Not in town, that's too obvious." Owen straightened despite his injury. "She can stay at my ranch. We've already established it's defensible, and my mother would welcome the company." Miller and Hayes exchanged glances. "That might work," the marshal acknowledged, "especially if we circulate a rumor that Miss Dawson has been moved to Cheyenne under federal protection." "I can't impose on you again," Brianna protested, looking at Owen. "You've already been wounded because of me." "It's not an imposition," Owen said firmly. "And the ranch is the safest place I can think of. My father built it with defense in mind, high ground, clear sightlines in all directions." Marshal Hayes nodded decisively. "It's settled then. Miss Dawson will remain at the Rhodes Ranch under guard until we apprehend the Blackburns. I'll assign 2 of my deputies to supplement Sheriff Miller's men." The decision made, preparations began immediately. Owen sent a telegram to his mother explaining the situation, while Brianna gathered the few belongings she'd accumulated during her stay in Alta. By late afternoon, they were ready to depart, accompanied by Deputy Wilson and one of Marshal Hayes's men. The journey to the ranch was tense but uneventful. Owen, still weakened by his injury, rode more slowly than usual, his jaw tight with determination. Brianna found herself watching him constantly, worried that he was pushing himself too hard. Martha Rhodes was waiting on the porch when they arrived, her expression a mixture of concern and resolve. She embraced Brianna warmly, then fussed over her son, insisting he go inside and rest immediately. "You men," she addressed the deputies, "can set up in the bunkhouse. There's fresh bedding and food in the kitchen." Inside, the cabin was just as Brianna remembered it: simple, clean, and welcoming. Martha had prepared the small guest room, adding touches like fresh wildflowers in a jar and extra quilts despite the summer warmth. "I hope you'll be comfortable," she said as she showed Brianna to the room. "I know it's not much compared to what you might be used to." "It's perfect," Brianna assured her, "and your kindness means more than I can express." Martha patted her hand. "Any woman who inspires my son to face down outlaws is welcome in this house." Her eyes twinkled. "Besides, it's nice having another female around. Owen's a good boy, but he's not much for conversation some days." That evening they shared a simple but hearty meal. Owen, despite his mother's protests, insisted on joining them at the table rather than eating in bed. His color was better, Brianna noted, and though he moved carefully, his strength seemed to be returning. After supper, they gathered by the fireplace, more for the comfort of its glow than for warmth in the mild summer evening. The deputies maintained their watch outside, their occasional movements a reminder of the danger that still lurked. "Tell me about your family, Miss Dawson," Martha requested as she took up her knitting. "Owen mentioned your father was a judge." Brianna nodded, grateful for the chance to remember happier times. "Judge Henry Dawson. He served on the circuit court in Colorado Territory for 15 years. My mother died when I was young, so it was mostly just the two of us, moving from town to town as his circuit required." "That must have been difficult," Martha observed. "Sometimes," Brianna admitted, "but it was also an adventure. Papa made sure I was educated properly despite our nomadic lifestyle. He brought tutors with us when he could and taught me himself when he couldn't." "He sounds like a remarkable man," Owen said quietly. "He was." Brianna's throat tightened with emotion. "He believed deeply in justice, not just the law, but true justice. He used to say that the frontier needed more than just guns and gold to thrive. It needed principles, community, education." "A wise perspective," Martha agreed, her needles clicking steadily. "That's why Jacob Owen's father brought us here. He wanted to help build something that would last." The conversation drifted to lighter topics as the evening wore on. Martha shared stories of Owen's childhood that made him shift uncomfortably in his seat, but brought a smile to Brianna's lips. In turn, Brianna described some of her more memorable experiences as a teacher, including the time a student's pet frog escaped during arithmetic lessons. It was nearly midnight when they finally retired, the sense of danger temporarily forgotten in the warmth of shared laughter and deepening connections. Days at the ranch fell into a rhythm. The deputies maintained their vigilant watch, rotating shifts with men from town who brought news and supplies. Marshal Hayes sent regular updates via telegram. Leads followed, potential sightings investigated, but no definitive capture of the Blackburns yet. Owen recovered steadily, at first chafing under his mother's and Brianna's insistence that he limit his activities, but gradually accepting their care with something approaching grace. By the end of the first week, he was able to perform light ranch duties, though he still tired more quickly than he would admit. Brianna found unexpected contentment in the simple routines of ranch life. She helped Martha with household tasks, learning to make soap from scratch and to bake bread in the wood-burning oven. In the evenings, she often read aloud from one of the books in the Rhodes's modest collection, her teacher's voice bringing the words to life. Sometimes, she caught Owen watching her during these readings, his expression thoughtful. When their eyes met, Neither would look away immediately, a silent acknowledgement of something growing between them that neither was quite ready to name. On the 10th day of Brianna's stay, a violent thunderstorm swept across the prairie. Rain lashed against the cabin windows, and lightning split the dark afternoon sky. The deputies had moved into the main house from the bunkhouse, maintaining their watch from the relative comfort of the front room. Brianna stood by the window, watching the rain transform the dusty yard into a sea of mud. Owen joined her, his presence a steady comfort. "I've always loved storms," she confessed. "The wildness of them, the reminder of how small we really are." "Most ranchers dread them," Owen replied. "But I understand what you mean. There's a certain power in them that demands respect." Thunder cracked overhead, making the cabin tremble. Brianna jumped slightly, and Owen's hand found hers, a reflexive gesture of reassurance that neither pulled away from. "You think they'll ever catch them?" Brianna asked softly. "The Blackburns?" Owen considered the question seriously. "Yes," he finally said. "Men like that push their luck too far eventually, and Marshall Hayes is determined. And when they do, what happens then?" His hand tightened around hers. "Then you're free to decide your own future." Brianna turned to face him fully, searching his eyes. "And what if my future includes Alta, the teaching position? I think Alta would be lucky to have you," Owen said, his voice deepening. "I think—" The sound of approaching horses interrupted whatever he had been about to say. The deputies immediately moved to alert positions, guns drawn. "No one should be out in this weather," Owen muttered, reaching for his rifle. Through the rain-streaked windows they could make out 3 riders approaching slowly, heads bowed against the deluge. "Marshall's men," Brianna suggested hopefully. One of the deputies peered through the window, then shook his head. "Don't recognize them, and they're not wearing badges." Owen positioned himself between Brianna and the door. "Get to the back room," he ordered quietly. "Both of you," he added, glancing at his mother. Martha nodded grimly, taking Brianna's arm. "Come, dear. Owen and the deputies know what they're doing." Reluctantly, Brianna allowed herself to be led to the bedroom, where Martha immediately closed the shutters and retrieved a small revolver from a drawer. "Jacob insisted I learn to use this," she explained, checking that it was loaded. "Never thought I'd need to, but here we are." In the main room, they could hear the deputies conferring with Owen, their voices too low to distinguish words. Then the sound of the front door opening, followed by unfamiliar voices. "Just looking for shelter from the storm," a man was saying. "Our camp got washed out up by Elk Creek." "Mighty far from the main trail," came Owen's skeptical response. "Got turned around in the rain. Saw your lights, figured you might spare some dry space in your barn." The conversation continued, tension evident in the clipped exchanges. Brianna pressed her ear to the bedroom door, straining to hear more clearly. "Something's not right," Martha whispered. "Owen wouldn't keep them standing there this long if he thought they were genuine travelers." A sudden crash from the main room confirmed her suspicion, followed by shouts and the distinctive sound of gunfire. Brianna's heart leapt to her throat as Martha pulled her away from the door, positioning them both behind the bed. The bedroom door burst open, revealing a wild-eyed man with a gun. "Found them!" he shouted over his shoulder before leveling his weapon at the women. Martha raised her revolver without hesitation and fired. The man staggered back, a look of surprise on his face as he clutched his shoulder. Before he could recover, one of the deputies appeared behind him, striking him on the head with the butt of his pistol. The man crumpled to the floor. "Stay here," the deputy ordered, dragging the unconscious intruder clear of the doorway before rushing back to the main room where the fight continued. More gunshots, the sound of breaking furniture, a cry of pain. Brianna couldn't tell if it was friend or foe. She exchanged terrified glances with Martha, whose hand remained steady on her revolver despite her pale face. Then, abruptly, silence fell. "Owen," Martha called, her voice tight with fear. "Owen, are you all right?" "I'm here, Ma," came the welcome response, though his voice sounded strained. "It's over. You and Brianna can come out now." They emerged cautiously to find the main room in disarray, furniture overturned, a window shattered, bloodstains on the wooden floor. Two strange men lay dead, while a third, the one Martha had shot, was being bound by one of the deputies despite his wound. Owen stood by the fireplace, a fresh cut on his cheek but otherwise unharmed. One of the deputies was less fortunate, clutching a bloody arm that the other lawman was wrapping with a torn shirt. "Blackburn's men?" Brianna asked, though she already knew the answer. Owen nodded grimly. "Not Jeremiah himself, but definitely his gang. They used the storm for cover." He looked at the surviving outlaw with contempt. "Didn't expect us to be ready for them." "How did you know?" Martha asked, still gripping her revolver. "No decent traveler approaches a house like that in a storm without calling out from a distance," Owen explained. "And they were too interested in who might be inside rather than just getting shelter." He turned to Brianna, his expression softening with concern. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head. "Your mother is quite the markswoman." A ghost of a smile touched Owen's lips. "Pa made sure of that." He sobered quickly. "But this changes things. If these men found us, others might too. We need to move you somewhere safer." The wounded deputy grimaced as his companion tightened the makeshift bandage. "We should get back to town, report this to the sheriff and the marshal." "They'll want to question this one," he nodded toward the captive. "In this storm," Martha objected, "the creek will be up, you'd never make it across." Owen considered their options, his expression troubled. "We'll wait until morning. The storm should pass by then. In the meantime, we take turns keeping watch." No one slept much that night. The deputies secured their prisoner in the barn, one guarding him while the other tended to his injured comrade. Owen insisted on taking the first watch in the cabin despite his still healing wound, positioning himself by the repaired window with a clear view of the approach. Brianna sat with him, unable to contemplate sleep after the evening's violence. Martha had finally retired, though Brianna suspected she too remained wakeful in her room. "I'm sorry," Brianna said softly, watching Owen's profile in the dim light of the single lamp they'd left burning. He turned to her, surprised. "For what, all of this?" She gestured to encompass the damaged room, the blood-stained floor. "Your injury, the danger to your mother, your home." Owen's expression was incredulous. "You can't possibly blame yourself for the actions of men like the Blackburns." "But if you hadn't come here," Owen interrupted firmly, "a murderer would have gone unpunished and his brother would still be terrorizing innocent people." His voice softened. "Besides, if you hadn't come here, I would never have met you." The simple statement hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning. Brianna's breath caught as Owen reached across the small space separating them, his calloused fingers gently touching her cheek. "I don't regret a moment of it," he said quietly. "Not one." Morning brought clearing skies and the arrival of Sheriff Miller with a full posse, alerted by concerns when the deputies failed to check in as scheduled. The surviving outlaw was taken into custody, his wound treated by Dr. Spencer, who had accompanied the sheriff. "Marshal Hayes is closing in on Jeremiah Blackburn," Miller reported as they gathered in the repaired main room. "This attack suggests they're getting desperate. All the more reason to move Miss Dawson to a more secure location," the marshal's deputy insisted. Owen, who had been silent during the discussion, finally spoke up. "The ranch is compromised now that they've found it, but taking her back to town would be expected." "What do you suggest?" Miller asked. Owen glanced at Brianna, something unspoken passing between them. The old line cabin up in Elk Basin. It's remote, hard to find unless you know it's there. My father built it for winter herding, but we haven't used it much in recent years. The sheriff considered the idea. That might work. How many men would it take to secure it? 2 if they're good, Owen replied, plus myself. Miller's eyebrows rose. You're still recovering from a gunshot wound. I know the terrain better than anyone, Owen countered, and I've got personal stakes in this. His meaning was clear to everyone in the room, especially Brianna, whose cheeks colored slightly under his steady gaze. It's Miss Dawson's decision, Miller said finally. All eyes turned to her. Brianna thought of the danger, the isolation, the continued disruption to these people's lives. But when she looked at Owen, she saw only determination and something deeper, something that made her heart race. I trust Mr. Rhodes, she said simply. If he believes the cabin is the safest option, then I agree. Preparations were made swiftly. Martha packed provisions, her practical nature asserting itself despite her obvious concern for her son. The 2 most experienced deputies were selected to accompany them, while the rest would maintain a visible presence in town to support the fiction that Brianna had been moved there. By midday, they were ready to depart. The journey would take them into the foothills, following game trails rather than established roads to reduce the chance of being tracked. Martha embraced Brianna tightly before they left. Take care of my stubborn son, she whispered. And remember, whatever happens, you're family now. The words brought unexpected tears to Brianna's eyes. Thank you, she managed, for everything. The first few hours of travel passed without incident. Owen led the way, his movements still somewhat stiff, but his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. The deputies followed behind Brianna, alert for any sign of pursuit. The terrain grew more challenging as they ascended into the foothills' rocky outcroppings, dense stands of pine, steep slopes that required careful navigation. By late afternoon, they had climbed high enough to look back over the valley they'd left behind, Alta a mere speck in the distance. Almost there, Owen announced as they rounded a particularly steep ridge. The cabin's just beyond that copse of aspen. The line cabin was smaller than Brianna had imagined, a single room with a stone fireplace, sturdy walls of hand-hewn logs, and a small covered porch. But it was solid and defensible, with narrow windows that could serve as gun ports if necessary, and a location that commanded views of all approaches. Inside, the furnishings were sparse but adequate: a table and chairs, a cast-iron stove, 2 narrow beds against opposite walls, and shelves stocked with basic supplies. It's not much, Owen apologized as he helped Brianna unsaddle her horse, but it will keep us safe until this is over. Brianna surveyed their temporary refuge with approval. It's perfect. Thank you for thinking of it. The deputies set about establishing a perimeter, identifying the best positions for keeping watch and planning their rotation. Owen busied himself with starting a fire in the stove and organizing their supplies, his practical nature finding comfort in these routine tasks. As dusk fell, they shared a simple meal of beans, jerky, and hardtack trail food that required minimal preparation but provided sustenance. The deputies took first watch, leaving Owen and Brianna alone in the cabin's main room, illuminated only by the soft glow of a kerosene lamp and the dying fire in the stove. You should take one of the beds, Owen suggested, gesturing to the narrow cots. I'll sleep by the fire. Brianna shook her head. You're still healing. You need proper rest. I've slept in worse places, he assured her with a hint of a smile. So have I, Brianna countered, recalling nights spent in drafty courthouses as she accompanied her father on his circuit. At least let me check your wound before you settle in." Owen hesitated, then nodded, unbuttoning his shirt with careful movements. Brianna tried to maintain a professional demeanor as he revealed the bandaged area, but her heart quickened at the sight of his bronzed skin and the firm muscles of his chest and shoulders. Focusing on the task at hand, she gently removed the old bandage. The wound was healing well, the angry redness had faded, and new tissue was forming along the edges of the injury. "It looks good," she said, her voice not quite steady as she applied the fresh bandage Dr. Spencer had provided. "Another week or two, and you'll barely know it happened." Owen caught her hand as she finished, his fingers warm against hers. "Thank you," he said softly, "not just for this, but for your courage through all of this." Brianna looked up, meeting his gaze directly. "I could say the same to you. You've risked everything for me, a complete stranger." "Not a stranger anymore," Owen replied, his voice deepening. "Not by a long shot." The air between them seemed to charge with unspoken words and feelings. Brianna was acutely aware of his proximity, of the warmth radiating from his skin, of the intensity in his hazel eyes. A sudden noise outside broke the moment, one of the deputies clearing his throat as he approached the cabin to report all clear. Owen released her hand and quickly rebuttoned his shirt, his expression a mixture of regret and resolve. "Get some rest," he said gently. "Tomorrow will be another long day." Days in the line cabin settled into a cautious routine. The deputies maintained their watch, rotating positions to cover all approaches. Owen, despite Brianna's protests, insisted on taking his share of guard duty as his strength continued to return. When not on watch, they occupied themselves with necessary tasks, chopping wood, preparing meals, maintaining their equipment. In the quiet moments between, conversation flowed more easily than Brianna would have expected, revealing the deepening connection between them. She learned that Owen had served 3 years with the cavalry before returning to help his father with the ranch, that he had a passion for astronomy instilled by a teacher in his youth, that he dreamed of expanding the ranch to include orchards like the ones he remembered from his Missouri childhood. In turn, she shared her own hopes and dreams, her desire to establish a proper school library in whatever community she settled in, her secret ambition to write stories of frontier life for Eastern publications, her belief in education as the foundation for a more civilized West. On the 4th evening, a summer storm rolled through the mountains, less violent than the one that had struck the ranch, but still impressive in its power. Thunder echoed off the peaks, and rain drummed steadily on the cabin's roof. Owen returned from his watch shift, soaked despite the oilskin slicker he wore. Brianna met him with a towel and a steaming cup of coffee. "Deputy Ellis says the creek's rising," Owen reported as he removed his dripping hat. "If it keeps up, the lower trail might wash out. Are we in danger here?" Brianna asked, concerned. Owen shook his head, accepting the coffee gratefully. "The cabin's high enough, but it might delay any messages from town." They sat before the fire, listening to the storm rage outside. The deputy on watch had taken shelter in the small lean-to attached to the cabin, leaving them effectively alone. "You ever wonder," Brianna said after a comfortable silence, "how different life might have been if you'd made other choices? If your father hadn't brought you west, or if you'd stayed with the cavalry?" Owen considered the question thoughtfully. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but I've learned that regret is a poor companion. Better to focus on the path ahead than the roads not taken." "And what do you see on that path?" Brianna asked softly. Owen's eyes met hers, their expression open in a way she hadn't seen before. "Things I wouldn't have dared hope for a month ago," he said. "A future that seems fuller somehow." He set his coffee aside and moved to sit beside her on the rough-hewn bench. "Brianna," he began, then paused, searching for words. "I'm not a man who speaks easily about feelings, but these past weeks, despite all the danger and uncertainty, have been special," Brianna finished for him when he faltered. "For me, too." Owen's hand found hers, their fingers intertwining naturally. "When this is over, when you're truly safe, I'd like to court you properly, if you're amenable." The formal phrasing made Brianna smile. "I'm very amenable, Owen Rhodes." His answering smile transformed his face, erasing the worry lines and revealing the younger man beneath the serious exterior. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he leaned closer. Their first kiss was gentle, a soft exploration that quickly deepened as Brianna responded with a passion that surprised them both. Owen's arms encircled her, pulling her closer as the storm raged unnoticed outside. When they finally parted, both were breathing unevenly. Owen rested his forehead against hers, his eyes closed as if memorizing the moment. "I've wanted to do that since the first day," he confessed. "When you rode into my life with danger at your heels and fire in your eyes." Brianna laughed softly. "Even covered in dust and half delirious with exhaustion." "Especially then," Owen insisted, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "You were the bravest thing I'd ever seen." The sound of approaching footsteps on the porch forced them to separate just before Deputy Ellis entered, shaking rain from his slicker. "All quiet," he reported, pretending not to notice their flushed faces and Brianna's slightly disheveled hair. "But that storm's something else." Lightning hit a pine about half a mile down the ridge. Owen cleared his throat, regaining his composure. "Keep an eye on the creek level. If it gets too high, we might need to move to higher ground." The deputy nodded and retreated to check on his partner, a knowing smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Left alone again, Owen and Brianna exchanged glances that held equal parts embarrassment and amusement. "I think the secret's out," Brianna whispered. Owen chuckled, the sound warm and rich in the small cabin. "If those two haven't noticed how I look at you, they're the worst lawmen in the territory." Morning brought clear skies and news. A rider from town arrived, having taken the longer but safer northern route to avoid the swollen creek. He carried a telegram from Marshal Hayes. "Blackburn cornered, stop 3 gang members captured, stop Jeremiah still at large, stop maintain vigilance, stop its progress," Owen said cautiously after reading the message. "But until Jeremiah himself is caught." "I'm still in danger," Brianna finished. "I understand." The messenger also brought personal news. Martha was well. The ranch repairs were complete, and Sheriff Miller had presented Brianna's teaching credentials to the Alta Town Council, who were favorably disposed to hiring her once the current situation was resolved. "They're already planning the school year around you," the young deputy reported with a grin. "Mrs. Peterson's organizing a quilting bee to make you a welcome gift." The thought of such acceptance, of a community ready to embrace her, brought tears to Brianna's eyes. Owen, noticing, squeezed her hand reassuringly. "Told you Alta takes care of its own," he said softly. 2 more days passed without incident. On the morning of the 7th day at the line cabin, Owen woke before dawn, a sense of unease nagging at him. He checked on the deputies, both at their posts, alert and vigilant, then scanned the surrounding terrain as the first light of day crept over the eastern peaks. Nothing seemed amiss, yet the feeling persisted. Years of frontier living had taught him to trust his instincts. He rechecked his rifle, made sure his pistol was loaded, and waited. Inside the cabin, Brianna stirred, awakened by the unusual silence. Normally, Owen would have started the stove by now, the familiar sounds of morning routine providing comfort in their isolated outpost. She dressed quickly and stepped onto the porch, finding Owen standing motionless, his attention fixed on the northern approach. "What is it?" she asked quietly, moving to stand beside him. "Not sure," he admitted. "Something doesn't feel right." Deputy Ellis joined them, his own expression concerned. "Johnson thought he heard something in the night, like someone moving through the underbrush, but we couldn't spot anything." Owen nodded slowly. "Keep your eyes open. I'm going to scout the ridge. If I'm not back in an hour, get Miss Dawson to town any way you can." "Owen, no," Brianna protested. "If there's danger, better to find it before it finds us," he interrupted gently. "Ellis and Johnson will keep you safe." Before she could argue further, he checked his weapons one last time and set off, moving with the silent efficiency of a man accustomed to wilderness tracking. The morning dragged on with excruciating slowness. Brianna paced the small cabin, alternating between watching the window and helping the deputies reinforce their defensive positions. As the hour Owen had specified came and went with no sign of his return, her anxiety grew. "We should go look for him," she insisted as noon approached. Deputy Johnson shook his head firmly. "Our orders are to protect you, madam. If Mr. Rhodes isn't back by midday, we're taking you to town. And leave him out there alone, possibly injured or—" She couldn't bring herself to voice the worst possibility. "Owen Rhodes knows these mountains better than most," Ellis reassured her. "If there's trouble, he'll handle it." As if summoned by their conversation, a single gunshot echoed through the hills, followed by two more in quick succession. Brianna's heart stopped. "That came from the North Ridge," she whispered. The deputies exchanged grim looks. Johnson took position by the window while Ellis checked their horses, preparing for a possible rapid departure. "If that was Owen," Johnson said, "he was signaling. 3 shots is a warning." Minutes stretched like hours as they waited, weapons ready. Then, movement at the edge of the clearing, Owen running full tilt toward the cabin, his rifle in hand. "Blackburn," he shouted as he reached them. "Coming from the east, at least 3 men." No sooner had the words left his mouth than gunfire erupted from the tree line. A bullet splintered the cabin's doorframe inches from Brianna's head, as Johnson pulled her roughly inside. Owen dove for cover behind a water barrel on the porch, returning fire with measured shots. "Get her out the back way," he called to the deputies. "I'll hold them here." "Not without you," Brianna cried, struggling against Deputy Ellis's restraining grip. "There's no time to argue," Owen shouted, ducking as another volley of bullets struck the cabin. "They're trying to flank us." Through the back window, Johnson spotted movement in the pine grove behind the cabin. "Too late," he said grimly. "They're on both sides now." They were trapped. 4 defenders against an unknown number of attackers, with limited ammunition and no hope of immediate reinforcement. Brianna felt fear rising in her throat, threatening to choke her, but forced it down. This was not the time for panic. "The root cellar," she suggested suddenly, remembering Owen mentioning it days earlier. "If we can get down there, no good," Ellis interrupted. "One entrance means one exit." "They'd just wait us out." Owen had made it inside during a lull in the firing, his expression taut but controlled. "We need to draw them out, make them expose themselves." "How?" Johnson demanded. "They've got us pinned down." Owen's eyes met Brianna's across the room, and she saw in them a desperate resolve that both terrified and inspired her. "I've got a plan," he said, "but it's risky." What followed was a flurry of preparation. Using spare clothing, they fashioned a crude dummy which they positioned near the front window. Owen stripped off his distinctive hat and coat, giving them to Johnson, who was of similar build. "When I give the signal, show the dummy at the front window," Owen instructed. "They'll focus their fire there. Meanwhile, Ellis and I will circle behind them from the south side." "And me," Brianna asked, refusing to be sidelined. Owen handed her his spare pistol. "You and Johnson hold the cabin. If anyone gets past us, you'll be the last line of defense." It wasn't what she wanted to hear, but Brianna understood the logic. She was the least experienced with firearms, and someone needed to maintain the illusion that all four of them remained in the cabin. "Be careful," she said softly as Owen prepared to leave, their private moment observed but tactfully ignored by the deputies. Owen's hand brushed her cheek briefly. "Always." He and Ellis slipped out through a small rear window, using the angle of the cabin to shield them from view. Johnson took position with the dummy, ready to create the diversion that would hopefully draw the attackers' attention. For several long minutes, nothing happened. Then Owens signaled a bird call that sounded nothing like the native species cut through the tense silence. Johnson immediately set their plan in motion, manipulating the dummy to create the impression of movement near the window. As predicted, gunfire erupted from the tree line, concentrated on the front of the cabin. Brianna positioned herself at the rear window, pistol ready, watching for any sign of movement. Her heart pounded so loudly she feared it might betray her position. The gunfire intensified, then suddenly shifted as shouts of alarm rose from the attacker's position. Ellis and Owen had sprung their trap. More shots, confused yelling, then the distinctive report of Owen's rifle 3 times in rapid succession. A signal of some kind, but Brianna didn't know its meaning. Johnson apparently did. "Stay here," he ordered, heading for the door. "That's the coming in signal." He slipped outside, leaving Brianna alone in the cabin, straining to understand what was happening. The gunfire had stopped, but men's voices continued, some angry, others triumphant. Then the cabin door opened, and Owen stood framed in the entrance, dusty and disheveled but wonderfully, gloriously alive. "It's over," he said simply. Behind him, Ellis and Johnson were securing 3 men, binding their hands with rope. One was clearly wounded, blood staining his trouser leg, while another sported a rapidly swelling eye. The third, a lean man with cold eyes and a face that resembled the hanged Thomas Blackburn, glared with undisguised hatred. "Jeremiah Blackburn, I presume," Brianna said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice as she approached the captured outlaw. "You cost me my brother, woman," Blackburn snarled. "I swore I'd make you pay." "Your brother cost himself his life when he murdered an innocent man," Brianna replied. "Just as you've cost yourself yours with your pursuit of vengeance." Owen stepped between them, his expression hard as he addressed Blackburn. "Territory's got a hanging judge coming through next month. I'd start making peace with whatever God you believe in." Deputies Ellis and Johnson secured the prisoners in the lean-to under guard while Owen checked Brianna for injuries, his hands gentle as they moved from her shoulders to her face. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his eyes scanning her intently. "I'm fine," she assured him. "But you're bleeding." Owen glanced down at his sleeve, where a bullet had grazed his arm, leaving a shallow furrow. "It's nothing," he dismissed. "What matters is that it's finally over. You're safe now, truly safe." The realization washed over Brianna like a wave. The weeks of fear and flight, of looking over her shoulder and starting at shadows, were ended. Jeremiah Blackburn was captured, his gang scattered or imprisoned. She was free. The emotion overwhelmed her suddenly, and she found herself trembling uncontrollably. Owen pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly as the tension of the past month released itself in a flood of tears. "It's all right," he murmured against her hair. "Let it out. I've got you." Later, as the deputies prepared to transport the prisoners to Alta, Owen and Brianna stood on the cabin porch, watching the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the mountainside. "What happens now?" Brianna asked, her voice still somewhat shaky from the emotional release. Owen took her hand, his calloused fingers intertwining with hers. Now we go home. You start your new life in Alta. I return to my ranch. He paused, then added softly, and I court you properly if that offer still stands. Brianna turned to face him, her heart fuller than she'd ever imagined possible after the tragedy that had driven her from Laramie. It more than stands, she assured him. Though I'd say we're well past the formal introduction stage of courtship. Owen's smile was warm as he drew her closer. True enough. Perhaps we should skip ahead a few chapters. To the part where we live happily ever after, Brianna suggested, only half joking. That's the goal, Owen agreed, his expression growing serious. I know it's fast, and some might say foolish given how little time we've known each other. But I've never been more certain of anything in my life, Brianna Dawson. These past weeks have shown me exactly what kind of woman you are: brave, principled, compassionate, and I find myself falling in love with you more each day. The declaration, so straightforward and heartfelt, brought fresh tears to Brianna's eyes. I never expected to find love while running for my life, she admitted. But life rarely follows the paths we expect, does it? No, Owen agreed. Sometimes it leads us into danger, only to guide us towards something precious we might otherwise have missed. Their kiss was a promise of comfort after fear, of peace after turmoil, of a future neither had dared imagine before fate and courage had brought them together. The journey back to Alta the following day was triumphant. Word of Jeremiah Blackburn's capture had spread quickly, and townspeople lined the main street as the prisoners were escorted to the jail. Marshal Hayes personally congratulated Owen and the deputies, commending their bravery and resourcefulness. Brianna found herself surrounded by well-wishers, women who would soon be her neighbors, parents eager to entrust their children to her care, shopkeepers and ranchers and miners, all welcoming her to their community. Martha Rhodes embraced her like a daughter, whispering tearful thanks for her safe return. In the weeks that followed, life took on a rhythm that felt both new and somehow familiar. Brianna was officially hired as Alta's schoolteacher, given quarters in the rooms above the schoolhouse, and immediately set about preparing for the fall term. Owen divided his time between ranch work and helping Brianna settle in, his courtship conducted in the full and approving view of the entire town. They picnicked by Elk Creek, attended Sunday services together, joined community gatherings where their growing relationship was the subject of fond speculation and good-natured teasing. Owen taught Brianna to ride better, to shoot accurately, to identify the native plants and animals of her new home. In turn, she introduced him to poetry and literature, to the satisfaction of teaching a child to read, to the simple pleasure of dancing on the schoolhouse porch as the sun set over the mountains. 2 months after Blackburn's capture, as autumn painted the aspen groves gold and crimson, Owen took Brianna riding to a hilltop overlooking both Alta and his ranch. They dismounted to enjoy the view. The valley spread before them like a patchwork quilt of farms, rangeland, and forest. "Beautiful, isn't it?" Owen said, standing behind her with his arms wrapped around her waist. "It's perfect," Brianna agreed, leaning back against his solid warmth. "I can't believe how quickly it's come to feel like home." "About that," Owen began, a nervous quality in his voice she'd rarely heard before. "I've been thinking." He turned her gently to face him, then, to her surprise, dropped to one knee, taking her hands in his. "Brianna Dawson, I know we haven't known each other long by most standards, but I've learned that life on the frontier measures time differently. In the months since you rode into my life, you've brought more joy, more purpose, more meaning than I ever thought possible. He reached into his pocket and withdrew a simple gold band with a small ruby set in its center. "Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife, of building a life with me, wherever that may lead?" Tears of happiness blurred Brianna's vision as she looked down at this man who had risked everything for her, whose quiet strength and unwavering principles had captured her heart so completely. "Yes," she whispered, then louder with all the certainty in her soul. "Yes, Owen Rhodes. I would be proud to be your wife." He slipped the ring onto her finger, a perfect fit, then stood and pulled her into an embrace that spoke of promises kept and a future bright with possibility. They were married on Christmas Eve, 1876, in Alta's small church, decorated with pine boughs and red ribbons for the holiday. Martha Rhodes wept happy tears as she watched her son exchange vows with the woman whose arrival had transformed all their lives. Sheriff Miller gave the bride away in the absence of her own father, and the entire town turned out to celebrate the union of their schoolteacher and the rancher who had protected her when danger threatened. Brianna wore a dress of cream-colored silk that Mrs. Peterson and the ladies of Alta had secretly made for her, embellished with lace from Martha's own wedding gown. Owen, uncharacteristically nervous, fumbled slightly with the ring during the ceremony but spoke his vows with unwavering conviction. "I promise to protect you, to honor you, to cherish you all the days of my life," he said, his voice carrying clearly to every corner of the packed church, "and to face whatever comes our way together with courage and faith." Brianna's answering vows were equally heartfelt. "I promise to stand by your side in all things, to support you, to love you without reservation. You saved more than my life. Owen, you saved my faith in goodness and justice, and I will spend my lifetime repaying that gift." Their first dance as husband and wife took place in the schoolhouse, transformed by loving hands into a festive hall where the entire community celebrated well into the night. As they moved together to the strains of a violin waltz, Brianna marveled at how far she had come from that terrified woman fleeing for her life just 6 months earlier. "What are you thinking?" Owen asked, noticing her introspective expression. "That life has a strange way of leading us exactly where we need to be," she replied. "That sometimes what looks like the darkest moment can actually be the beginning of the greatest happiness." Owen's smile was tender as he pulled her closer. "I was just thinking how grateful I am that you rode onto my land that day. That of all the places you could have sought refuge, you found me. Not chance," Brianna decided. "Destiny. Spring brought new beginnings." Owen expanded the ranch house to accommodate his growing family, adding a proper library for Brianna and a nursery that would, they hoped, soon be filled. She continued teaching, splitting her time between the schoolhouse in town and her duties as a rancher's wife, a balance that brought her deep satisfaction. On a warm evening in May, as they sat on their expanded porch watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of gold and crimson, Brianna shared the news she'd been suspecting for weeks. "Owen," she said, taking his hand and placing it gently on her still flat stomach, "we're going to have a baby." His expression transformed from confusion to wonder to absolute joy in the space of a heartbeat. "A baby," he repeated, his voice reverent. "Our child. Due in November, Dr. Spencer thinks," Brianna confirmed, her own happiness mirrored in Owen's face. He gathered her into his arms, his touch gentle as if she had suddenly become fragile. "You've given me everything," he whispered against her hair. "A purpose, a partner, and now a future beyond myself." Martha was ecstatic at the prospect of becoming a grandmother, immediately beginning work on quilts and tiny garments. The town of Alta celebrated the news of their teacher's impending motherhood with typical frontier practicality, organizing help for the fall term when Brianna would be unable to teach, arranging meals to be delivered after the birth, offering advice, solicited and unsolicited, on everything from morning sickness to naming conventions. Summer passed in a haze of contentment, punctuated by letters from Marshal Hayes reporting the formal sentencing of Jeremiah Blackburn to hang for his crimes. The news brought a sense of final closure to the ordeal that had brought Owen and Brianna together. "Does it bother you?" Owen asked one evening as they discussed the Marshal's latest letter. "Knowing that Blackburn will hang because of your testimony." Brianna considered the question seriously. "I don't take pleasure in any man's death," she said finally. "But I believe in justice, and Jeremiah Blackburn chose his path knowing the consequences. His actions have hurt so many families, created so much suffering." She rested a hand on her growing belly. "What bothers me more is thinking about the legacy of violence that might have continued if he hadn't been stopped." Owen nodded, understanding her perspective. "Our child will grow up in a safer world because of your courage," he said. "That's something to be proud of." November brought early snow to the Wyoming mountains, and with it, the birth of their son, Jacob Henry Rhodes, named for his two grandfathers. The labor was difficult 20 hours that tested Brianna's endurance and left Owen pacing anxiously outside the bedroom door, but the result was a healthy, robust boy with a shock of dark hair and his father's hazel eyes. "He's perfect," Owen whispered, cradling his newborn son with hands that trembled slightly from emotion. "Absolutely perfect." Brianna watched them together, her exhaustion forgotten in the wave of love that swept through her. This was what she had been moving toward all along. She realized this family, this home, this life built on principles and courage and the kind of love that stands firm in the face of danger. As winter settled over Alta, the Rhodes family established new routines centered around little Jacob's needs and schedule. Brianna temporarily set aside her teaching duties, finding unexpected fulfillment in motherhood. Owen proved to be a devoted father, often carrying the baby in a sling as he performed his less strenuous ranch chores, telling his infant son stories of cattle drives and mountains and brave horses. Christmas that year was especially meaningful, their first as a family of 3, and the anniversary of their wedding. They celebrated quietly at the ranch, with Martha and a few close friends joining them for a festive dinner. As they sat before the fire later that evening, Jacob sleeping peacefully in his cradle nearby, Owen presented Brianna with a small, carefully wrapped package. "What's this?" she asked, surprised by the unexpected gift. "Open it and see," he encouraged, a rare mischievous glint in his eyes. Inside was a leather-bound journal, its pages blank and inviting. The cover was embossed with her initials and a simple design of mountains and stars. "You once told me you wanted to write stories of frontier life," Owen explained. "I thought perhaps it was time to start." Tears pricked at Brianna's eyes as she ran her fingers over the beautiful gift. "I don't know what to write about," she admitted. Owen's smile was gentle as he took her hand. "Start with us," he suggested. "With a story about outlaws seeking revenge and a woman brave enough to stand against them and a cowboy who said, 'They'll face me first.'" "A love story?" Brianna asked, returning his smile. "The best kind," Owen agreed, drawing her close. "One with a happy ending." And so, as snow fell gently outside and their son slept peacefully beside them, Brianna Rhodes began to write the story of how danger and courage had led her to the greatest love of her life, a love that had transformed fear into hope, a journey into a homecoming, and 2 separate paths into one shared destiny on the wild Wyoming frontier.